Nice then. Okay, I'm just waiting for Justin. Mhm. Oh, let's see. Hmm. Oh, just unable joined. Ah,
Hey
there you
Mary.
are.
Hi
Hi.
Mary, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Nice to see
Good.
you.
You too. Every time I see you, you have a bit like a different background.
We just moved. Yeah, we just moved into a new home. So I
Yeah.
got a little bit more of a farm life going on here, enjoying
Oh,
it. Definitely good for the nervous system.
yes. And you got two new babies, four-legged
I
babies.
do. I do, yeah. Bruce and Albert, my two Einsteins, Bruce Banner and Albert Einstein. You
Amazing.
know.
Are they behaving?
As best as scientists can, they are quite inquisitive by nature. I mean, this is the
That's
way which
good.
scientists are, but they are behaving. They are behaving for the most part. How are you doing, Murray?
They've got character. I am really good. Just had my lunch, my SCD approved lunch.
Yeah,
So
that
on the
good old,
protocol.
the good old ACD. Oh man, I remember doing it 2 years ago. It's
Yeah.
tough. It's tough, but it's worth
It
it. It's a good. It's probably the best reset diet you can use, to be
Yeah,
honest
I
with
think
you.
it's really worth it. Not only that, I see that things are working. So for those who don't know what that is, it's a specific carbohydrate diet, which is used for people to help to rebuild their gut. But it's also interestingly used for children with autism, for example, right? So to see like what foods they react to. That's as much as I read about it, and I love it. I don't think it's actually difficult at all to stick to it. The tricky part is all the cooking. So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's the only part that I was like, oh, I wish that this was like a little bit easier on the cooking part, but that's fine. It's
Yeah,
all good.
it's a pain in the bum. The cooking is because everything's got to be
Mm.
pureed and prepared ahead of time. So, sorry, my phone was dying.
Yeah,
The battery was going low, so I had to configure everybody's
switch.
worrying. Where's Justin moving around to? His
Yeah,
ADD
yeah.
like expressions. No, it's the cooking is quite. It's the preparation before the cooking. I think the cooking part is easier. It's just the peeling and it's de-seeding.
Oh yeah. And
But
then you
it's
peel like 2 kilo, like not even two, like 3, 4 kilos of pears, and you get like 2 jars, or like like 3 jars of like pear puree. But it's all good. It's all worth it.
Yeah, you
Yep.
are heavily invested if you're able to see it through, for
Hmm.
sure. It's not a diet I give to everybody.
Hmm.
Although a lot of people should be on it to reset, their position of gut health and association that microbiome within the gut can have on the endocrine function, particularly because of the impact it has directly on the nervous system, which is
Hmm.
quite interesting, which is what we're going to be chatting partly about today. I think, you and I had a call early on this week
Yep.
discussing certain outcomes of labs. And, I don't know if you want to maybe this explain further to the audience from a woman's perspective of, especially a woman that's in health, that's looked after
Hmm.
herself for a number of years, not expecting that anything might be lingering in the background. But I'll let you go
Yeah.
on and maybe just give everybody a bit of background context.
Definitely, yeah. So it's kind of I feel like it's a huge irony that, that I help women and I worked with so many women helping them to get back on track with their health. And myself, I was going through life thinking that I don't have anything, major health issues or anything that could be wrong because I had zero symptoms. You know, I was perfectly healthy. Energy levels were okay. I was able to do my work, to enjoy life, all of those things. And I did some testing, some basic ones, but they were usually blood tests. And this is the thing that I want to also advocate for even stronger moving forward, that the correct testing is very, very important for women. Because I had no idea until earlier this year. I had some health issues, and we also had the virus, and you know the energy levels were not there, and all that. So we started, and by we I mean me and my boyfriend, we started looking into things of like how can we optimize our health and what can we actually make better. And then I was introduced to you because I already knew that I had something with my thyroid, that there's something that's off. My cholesterol levels were going up and up and up and up. And I was just like, what is happening here? Like, how is this even possible?
Mary,
And
Mary, do you mind if sorry to interject? I just feel
yeah,
like, because a lot of people out there are going to be listening in on this, and they're not
yeah,
going to know what symptoms look out for in relation to like poor thyroid. And obviously most people know the cold extremities and everything else, but maybe there's a few other personal symptoms that you experience, and they weren't necessarily debilitating, but they were prominent enough for you to become aware of them, increasing the expression over time. So maybe you
hmm
can just share with, especially with a woman out there, because thyroiditis has a 6 times more prevalence in female populace than that of male populace. And that's because
yeah,
of, the regulatory mechanisms of metabolism in a woman's brain is far more vulnerable to stress than that of a man's brain. And we'll talk
hmm
about why this is. It's to do with how the nervous system develops in relation to the microbiome. And I'll talk more a
definitely.
little bit later about this, but maybe you can just give them a few,
Yep.
key things to consider that they might be going through and not even realizing could be linked to the thyroid.
hmm So for me, I think the biggest one was really the energy levels all of a sudden tanking. And even though I was sleeping for like 10 hours, like I would have trouble getting out of the bed in the morning. And that was like, why is this? Like I was not progressing at the gym. Going to the gym was a struggle. So there was definitely the aspect of energies. That's one thing. And then my cycle, my period started to be messy. It started to, come and go like however it pleased. Like I had a cycle that was 22 days long, where my usual what would be 28 or 29 days. So I started freaking out. It's like, what is this? Like, what is this? Why is this happening? What signs are these? And then, because I'm 38, I also thought I was like, oh my God, am I like going into a menopause, like premature menopause, or like what is going on? Because we don't know what the outside, world environment, does with us, like what effects it has on us. So I was like, maybe I have something that I don't even know about, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to dig deeper. And that's when you suggested that we do the cycle mapping test, which moving forward, I'm not going to do with every single one of my clients, because anything else I've done in the past showed that I'm okay. I was on the
Yep.
range of okay. And
Yep.
even with the blood tests, when I go to a private lab here, and I did extensive lab works, and it was still, showing a lot of things in the green, like majority was in the green. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with those markers, right, is that they're based on the average of the general population.
Mm-hmm.
And is the general population actually healthy? If you think about it, it's not really, right? So
No.
where on the spectrum do you want to be of those markers? So, and then when we got my lab results back a couple of like 2 weeks ago, and I saw my hormones, and I was like, what is this? And that
Yeah.
was it was really hard to actually, also from the point of an ego, it's like I work with women, I help women, like how is this happening to me? I take care of myself, I eat healthy, I exercise. You also were telling me that one of the causes for hypothyroidism, which I have, or I'm inclined to, very likely, is inactivity. And I'm like, well, that's really not my case.
No, no, definitely
So
not. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
And that's
yeah,
just,
but
just to clarify, guys, that's excessive
mhm,
thyroid hormone accumulation. That's inactivity. is one reason. But there's
Hmm.
another reason, which I think Murray will go into
Um,
now. I'm just going
hmm.
to close this door as well. I'm here, Mary, just closing this office
Yep.
door because the dog's about to run in here. You know, these cuties, they
Yeah.
are, they're manic.
Oh, hi,
Cool.
Booby. A friend of mine from Malaysia just joined, so I'm just waving at her.
Hi, darling. Hello.
She's like my sister from she's my chocolate sister.
Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. Well, any sister of yours is a friend of mine.
Amazing. Okay, so
So, okay. So what you're saying is very, very important for people to take into consideration. Bloods are important. It's not that they're not important. But the thing about bloods, as Mary was saying right now, is firstly, you've got two issues. One, conventional medicine and the ranges of which they're determined to be ideal. Now, those ranges are forever increasing their range, okay, which means
hmm.
that the margin for error is bigger as well, okay, because it's based upon the percentile of populace that actually go into a state of disease. All right. Now, what indicates or what is classified as disease? Well, that's forever changing as well. Okay, because a
Mm.
lot of us, for example, obesity, I think it's like 63% of the American population now is considered to be obese, or 65. Right. So our reference of what is disease has shifted in the last 50 years dramatically. Right. It's normal to be fat now, in essence, right?
Yeah.
And actually, it's not normal at all. You know, obesity is a disease in its own right, and exactly that. It is a dysfunction of physiology that causes fat accumulation, and it's often not to any fault of anybody's lack of willpower or even to a certain degree. It's not because of not being 100% diligent or even vigilant in certain cases on the diet. It's most of the time, like we put so much pressure on, on people that are trying to lose weight, and giving them a hard time because they have a hamburger craving and they fulfill it, or they have a chocolate craving and fulfill it. But most of the other 95% of the time, they're actually really trying to eat cleanly, and yet they're still not losing weight. And even those that
Hmm.
do go on a strict diet don't lose weight. And the reason is because it's not as simple as calories in, calories out. The human body is a complex machinery of communication. And when there's poor communication in any component, particularly within the nervous system, it is going to go into positions of protection. So, and this is the difference between being the position of catabolic or energy producing or anabolic energy storing positioning. So if your nervous system has a perception that there's a lot of threat, in other words, a lot of catabolic um, influence going on,
Hmm.
it's going to do whatever it can in order to prevent itself from going into a state of decay, okay?
Hmm.
Which means it's going to shift anabolic responses. And this is
Hmm.
where excessive insulin is released. This is where in women, heightened testosterone levels come into effect, compromising other hormones such as estradiol and progesterone, causing hirsutism, masculinization effects, polycystic ovary syndrome, infertility, and so on and so forth. So within the reference ranges of conventional medicine, they don't give you indication as to when these things are showing the initial onset. They say, no, you're okay, but based on what? The
Hmm.
other the other thing about bloods is that they can provide you a lot of information. However, the difference between bloods and urinary hormonal sampling is the activity of the metabolites. Okay, so
Hmm.
basically the outcome of what is produced in the utility of hormones. Okay,
Hmm.
so hormones are just messages. Okay, the effect that
Hmm.
those messages have will create the outcome of metabolites. For example, progesterone, when it gets metabolized, becomes pregnanediol. Okay, and that has complete different impact into the nervous system than progesterone on its own. Okay, there's a
Hmm.
very stimulatory effect to the brain if it's heightened, if it's in excess, and it can have poor capacity to support stimulatory effect in the brain if it is not metabolized in the adequate fashion. And this comes down to the health of the liver again, and everything ties back into correlation. Everything,
Hmm.
everything
Can
is
I
correlated.
jump in for a second and
Please, please.
just maybe if you can give some examples of the stress that you mentioned, of like what can body perceive as stress? Because it's often not the stress that we think it is. It's not only the deadline for a presentation or some project that it's due. There are a lot of other things that can affect you and that your body can perceive as stress. And there are stresses that are good, but if they're in excess, especially for women, from what I know, is that the good stress can become bad stress.
To answer this question, it's a very complex answer, because most people think it's, just list all the stressors out there. And you can talk about non-native EMFs, you can talk about environmental toxins that you don't see, plastic, parabens, blah, blah, blah. All these things that I think a lot of people are aware of, maybe just need to have a bit of regurgitation to understand what they are.
Yeah.
However, it's far more complex than that. And I'll tell you why it's more complex than that. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. All good. Did you cut out? I think you did. Are you still with us? Let me just message him really quick.
Hello?
Okay.
Hi,
I
Miriam?
think you're back.
I'm back.
Yes.
Here we go.
Can you?
Sorry, there was
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So there's
Okay.
interruption
Good.
in the signal there.
That's okay.
So it's far more complex than just the present stressors. Right? So you got to take into consideration what your present stressors are for sure. If you got a lot of electromagnetic frequencies radiating around your being, your electromagnetic being, which should be close to that of the frequency of the Schumann frequency, which is that of the Earth's frequency of 7.2 to 7.8 hertz. However, and if you look at cellular waves, it can range right up to 60 to 120 hertz, depending on the cellular wave you're talking about. 5G even higher than that. So there are a lot of membrane disruptors. Okay, and this is what I'd like to call them. Whatever it might be, whatever frequency that's quite far outside the Schumann range, or quite far above 30 hertz. I think anything up to 30 hertz can have a positive benefit to the physiology of the human body. Anything above that can really cause detriment. But I call whatever those frequencies are membrane disruptors, okay? Because the membrane has hydrophilic and hydrophobic tail ends, right? To maintain the gradient between the intracellular as well as the extracellular hydration or ionic gradients, okay? So that information exchange can happen in a way that is productive rather than destructive, okay? So if entities inside the cell leak out, it's going to cause too much ATP to be outside the cell, and this can cause massive amounts of inflammation and diseases. Like, for example, autism is a disease that is linked to excessive extracellular ATP because of membrane disruption, okay, as one. Now, what actually instigates, stress? This is from genetics is one factor, but it's actually during fetal development right through puberty. And whatever stress, because interestingly, the nervous system develops at the same rate that the microbiome develops. So I'm going to repeat that. The nervous system develops at the same rate that the diversity and the density of microbiome develop. What this means is that they have interrelation with one another. If your nervous system is exposed to an environmental stressor, whether it be trauma, emotional trauma as a child, whether it be a virus that you caught, a debilitating virus as a child, whether it be exposure to lead as a child or excessive mercury as a child, Dr. Nishvitz, my good friend Domi, will talk at length about the impact that mercury has on the developing brain. And subsequently, that impact that it has on the central nervous system will actually cause conformational change to certain neuron components called dendrites. So you've got the neuron, you have the axons, and you have dendrites. To keep it simple, dendrites propagate the signal that neurons send out. Okay, and wherever the brain has a greater density of dendrites means it's going to be more responsive to the activity that part of the brain is responsible for. Meaning, if you have had a lot of stress exposure whilst you're in your mom's womb, that will impact your brain. But particularly during the pubescent years, okay, the brain becomes highly, highly volative to change. Why? Because in essence, physiology wants to create a foundative position as to allow the organism to survive through adult years. So it takes in as much information as possible during the years of puberty in order to create that change. Now, if during your years of puberty, you're exposed to antibiotics, heavy metals, psychological, physical, sexual, whatever trauma, your brain is going to be impacted by this. And subsequently, this will cause an impact onto how control of stress hormones have a relation to your body, which directly impacts the gut, And excess of HPA activity, frequent, rapid activity, will cause an increased likelihood of pathogenic bacteria to accumulate in the bowels. Mm-hmm. This will also impact the person through the rest of their life. They will have a higher susceptibility of catching colds, catching flu, having issues with their thyroid, having issues with psychological dysfunction or disorders, not dysfunction, sorry, it's an improper word to use, disorders. This is lifelong, and this is why often, myself included, those who have gone through some form of trauma, and it doesn't necessarily just need to be, abusive trauma. Other trauma, like I said, mercury can be a trauma, depending upon the severity of how it's affected your body. Later on in their lives, because they had to contend with something, they make many efforts in order to live a healthy life, but they still get sick quite often. And I know a lot of health, like geniuses, right, that you say, why, and this is where the society's like, why are they getting sick? Obviously, what they say may not have any relevance. It's like Charles Poliquin, for example, one of my mentors, who died of a heart attack in his 50s, right? So many people, disgustingly, had everything to say about everything that he professed during the time that he was actually creating a difference in people's health and lives. And yet, nobody ever thought to ask what his experience was as a youngster growing up. What was his conformational changes? What health battles was he facing? Regardless of the fact that he helped to elevate other people's health and lives. But no, everybody has a judgment to it. And that's the thing. Firstly, we need to stop judging others because we don't know the situation that they grew up in, let alone what they're living within. Okay? Focus on yourself. And if you want to be a critic, make sure to give valuable advice in order to have anything to critique to. Otherwise, please, keep your mouth shut and keep your opinion to yourself. It's as simple as that. I'm all for critics as long as they have valuable information that can actually provide change rather than just giving their opinion. Because too many people in this world give their opinion without any indication of how to create a difference or to help based upon their opinion. It's just judgment, in other words. You need to stop judging.
It's easier.
Way easier. Sorry, I get quite worked up about this topic because, I see it time and time again, especially in today's modern day society. Everybody's so hell-bent on becoming insta-famous. And ways in which they do that is to run other people down. And I'm sorry, I'm all for critique, because critique allows you to be better, but constructive critique, which means that if you have something that you don't agree with, please voice the ways in which your disagreement can actually provide benefit to the subject matter, rather than just your, open-ended opinion.
I also love what, yep. Go ahead.
So just to go back again, like Charles, he contributed so much to my career, to the career of so many other people that are brilliant. Dom Nischwitz, in other words, Dr. Nischwitz, also another one included in this. Callum Gore, world-class biochemist, also included in this. Tom Cridgington, one of the best strength conditioning coaches I know in the world, included into this. And yet, people had everything to say about what he had to offer may not have been accurate, and scrutinized him for it. Yet, having known a little bit about his upbringing, it wasn't easy. Just one of 12 or 13 kids. You can imagine how difficult that upbringing is. Right? Yet nobody takes into consideration the impact that this has on the nervous system and the lifelong effort a person will need to put into place in order to be able to contend better with stress. So when you're in your younger years and you're exposed to these stressors, right, you will make permanent change to the receptors or the control regions in the brain. For example, if you nurture a teenager in an environment that isn't filled with pornography, isn't filled with violence, isn't filled with abuse, but it's filled with respect for both sexes, respect for themselves, balanced education with physical activity, healthy foods, the likelihood that that child will be able to grasp greater capacity of IQ is relevant, is there. Because they're not going to have to contend and battle with conflicting EQ within themselves. Right. This is the reason as a society, we really need to be more conscious about what we're letting our children to be exposed to on social media platforms, because social media is a blessing and a curse in its own right, completely. All right. And the problem with the downside of social media is that it's becoming a narcissistic platform for promotion, self-promotion, right? And that's not helpful to anybody because it only sets a poor example. And I spoke about this the other day with a friend of mine. I said, my fiance has 2 children. I have a son. And anytime that I ever talk about a wealthy person, I don't talk about the things they have. I talk about the things that they've done. Because those are the things to focus on. Those are the things to really put your mind on as to the things that they've been able to do with their wealth for the world and the collective as a whole, rather than the Ferrari that they've bought, which means nothing. Yeah. It's nice to play a toy, then what doesn't do anything after that. So going back, the conformational changes. So if you have healthy neural activity, central nervous system neural activity, there'll be a great balance between prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. And anybody that understands the very basics of neurology will also be able to profess and also to agree and confirm what I'm about to say, that a memory is best solidified when there is an emotional correlation to it. Okay, so if you can link a new piece of information that you're learning to an emotion, you're more than likely to recall that memory, right? And that's the links between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. When you are bombarded with a lot of stress, the dendrite densities are reduced between these 2 regions of the brain and accumulate in the regions of the amygdala and the connections that the amygdala has with the nucleus accumbens, which is that of the basal nuclei. And these 2 regions help to regulate the primal part of the brain, if you want to call it that. Okay, the more animalistic survival parts of the brain. All right. So again, if you're exposed to this over a long period of time, first you have to ask yourself, what are your children? If you're going to have a child, or if you have a child, be really careful about what it is that they're exposed to and the environments they're living within, because it will affect them for the rest of their lives, and it will influence the adults they become and the society that we have in the future. If you yourself have been exposed to unwanted effects of trauma, I really send my sympathy, not empathy, sympathy, because a lot of us have also been exposed to it. However, I will say to you that in order to shift the way in which you can contend with stress, it will take a multitude of factors. Firstly, looking into your microbiome density, diversity. Secondly, looking into the state of your nervous system, and whether or not you need support by identical hormones, herbal adaptogens, nutrient cofactors, or even in certain cases, under supervision, the use of psychedelic medicines, which are absolutely groundbreaking in these scenarios. Groundbreaking. Another point of contention, and I'm waiting for the critics to come up here and give their endless, hopeless opinion, but it's fine. Please feel free to do so and waste your breath in doing it as well. But apart from that, these are necessary factors in addition to changing aspects of your life, becoming more loving, more caring, more generous, taking time to do charity work, because charity work is not just for people you help, it's for yourself as well. Let's not be coy here. Okay, when you help others, you're not only helping them, but you're helping yourself as well. And that's not a bad thing. It's adding positive energy to the collective. Incorporating meditation, quieting your mind, reading a book, listening to Alan Watts, my favorite. Changing the perspective, right? Why not? What you fill your mind with will sharpen your sword and how you can make a difference in this world. So a very long-winded answer to your question, Mary, but it's relevant because what influences one person, stress will not influence the next person's stress in the same way because of the foundational changes that occur during fetal development and pubescent years. It's very different from one person to another. And this is why some people can psychologically cope with huge amounts of stress and not feel the impact the stress is actually having on their physiology. And they get so shocked. Like, oh my God, all these things are wrong, but I didn't feel anything. I had no symptoms. And I often get this. I think this is your case as well. You had no severe symptoms, right? And
Yeah.
that's often like twofold. One, in situations whereby, on the contrast to this, where they've had a really healthy childhood background, their tolerance to stress is far greater. Okay? Because the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus connectivity is much stronger, so they can make better sense of what's going on around them, okay, rather than becoming emotively reactive to it. Or on the other side of it, if you've only been emotively reactive because of not because of your own fault, no one to blame, but because of your conditioning to do so, you are in such a state of continual emotive reaction that you don't know the difference when anything does actually happen. It's almost like when the nervous system has a situation when the boy cried wolf. It's a nervous system's, expression of that constantly. So you eventually ignore the boy because he's crying wolf, and then things come up. So everybody's different, and this is why subjective questionnaires are valuable for sure, but they're not always. They often are not indicative of what's actually going on. They can give direction where to look, which is why this is what I start with anybody I help. I always start with a subjective questionnaire, a lengthy, detailed one, to figure out, okay, what is it that they're perceiving to be wrong? Because it's very important to treat the individual, not just a test. But often the perception of the individual can be skewed because of elements in their past that have caused a compromise to how they know what's going on around them or how they understand what's going on. And this is where the objectivity of tests come in, but a diversity of angles of tests. So to go back on the bloods, bloods are really useful. And the reason why bloods are useful, yes, they can give indication of certain immune disruptions, endocrine disruptions, and so on and so forth. And they are really relevant in specific cases, especially autoimmune
Justin,
cancer and so on.
hold on, just 1 second. There is some
Sure.
I
Can you
think
hear
it
me?
was, yes, maybe the mic is like rubbing on your t-shirt.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Better?
That was just like a lot of noise. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, now it's
good
better.
now? Okay,
Yes,
cool.
I thought it was background, but I think it's actually like,
It was probably my shirt. So where was I? No, I lost track of thought there.
About blood tests, like what the blood tests can actually show.
Thank you.
Dysfunction.
Yeah, so blood tests, so they can show a lot of things. They can tell us, for example, cancers, the activity of specific cancers, autoimmune disease, activity of certain autoimmune disease. They are valuable in their own right. However, when it comes to endocrinology, and even when it comes to like cellular microbiology, I find that they can give a good overview of what the macro physiological systems are doing, but not necessarily the specifics of the activity. Okay, so they can give like the density, but not necessarily the activity, or they can't necessarily give you indication of what's disrupting the activity. For example, you can tell a lot about, behind a liver function panel, but you don't necessarily know what is actually directly causing it. You can hypothesize, which is what I normally do, and then I further validate my hypothesis to a prognosis looking into, whether it be organic acids, minerals, whatever it might be for that person. But bloods give you a good overview. Like in my opinion, they often can be regarded as a second stage provisional diagnosis, not a differential. And this is where like the Dutch test is so useful in hormones, because the Dutch test, especially cycle mapping, gives you an indication of how active the body is metabolizing the hormones, or what it does in those the use of those metabolites, but also at which peak points those hormones are most active in the menstrual rhythm. And in your case, we saw there was premature activity, and there was a short rate of metabolism occurring. And this has a relation to metabolic hormones and the thyroid impact that it was having on the progesterone relation, or the progesterone regulation as well. So, sorry, a long-winded answer, but I think it's very relevant for people to hear this, because a lot of people don't take this into consideration, and they give themselves a hard time. Like they feel bad about being anxious, they feel bad about being depressed, but they don't realize that it's no fault of their own. but it's every opportunity within themselves to rectify it and understand where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can hear some wind at the background. I can hear your.
Is that better?
There is.
Maybe
Yes,
cover
because
it. Maybe,
I
maybe
can see.
cover it.
I can see the tissue like at the back moving, so I think that there is some wind.
Maybe it's like, maybe
Okay.
it's the divine spirit, like calling and saying, cue the music.
Yeah, yeah,
Who knows?
exactly. So just one thing, because it's like I think that people, what they often want to test is like their levels of vitamins and minerals. And this is like what we saw even in my case, that it's like even the blood tests, like I mean, they were in green, let's say, right, on the blood test result. But when we did further testing, like organic acids test, and we did the Dutch tests, then we saw that my body is actually not working properly in order to even utilize those minerals and vitamins that actually come in. So what is the difference, if you can explain, between how can it be so different when you take a blood test and as opposed to when you go and do organic acids test?
Well, organic acids, in its description, are so everything about acids and bases, right? Acids facilitate activities and reactions in the body. Bases neutralizes activities. So
Mm-hmm.
organic acids, in essence, are the acidic activities of organic material within the body, all organic material, native and foreign. Okay, meaning that of like foreign microorganisms like fungus or bacteria, parasites, and so on, as well as native like your mitochondria, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, your own healthy biome function there as well, and the impact that, especially on the cellular organelle reactivity of what's actually going on. So that's where organic acids come in to effect, where bloods don't give that. They don't
Mm-hmm.
give that in the biological, biochemical activity. It doesn't give that indication whatsoever. And that's the biggest difference between the two. But they
Mm-hmm.
both are important.
Yeah.
Understand something. If you go on holiday and you go to spectate the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and you only look at it from one perspective or one angle, you're going to think to yourself, this guy was an absolute nutcase when he created this building. But when you walk around it, you'll see what an architectural marvel it really was. And it was almost a way in which the architect was trying to defy the perceptive laws of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
So in actual fact, it's an artistic expression of science. If you look at it from all around. And the same thing in the body. If you look at the body just by using bloods, you're going to think, this body is absolutely insane. But when you start to look at it from a different combination of diagnostics, you'll understand where the insanity is stemming from and realize it's not insane. It is just dysregulated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, amazing. And then I want to go into the topic, because we discussed this on Monday as well, the hormone replacement therapy in relation to cholesterol. Because you said something very interesting to me on Monday, which I didn't actually expect to, or like didn't know about. And that was, if like there are some people, if they don't go on the hormone replacement therapy later in life, their cholesterol might just be going out of whack, and it will not go down to like safe levels or to where it should be. I think you can explain that a lot better. So
Absolutely. I'm
it's
just going to close this
because
window because I can feel the window is going to disrupt my audio here. As much as I'm appreciating, because it's very hot here in South Africa, I will silence so I can give this. So yes, cholesterol. So cholesterol, first and foremost, what we have to understand, I define it as an acute phase reactant to biological requirement. Now, biological requirement is that of both anabolic and catabolic processes. In other words, cholesterol can be used to form hormones, can be used to form myelin, can be used to form bile. It can also be used to form healing of microabrasions into the arterial walls due to oxidative stress. Now, how our availability to be able to produce, and this is another caveat here, I don't know if most people are aware of this, but the majority of your cholesterol found in blood is not actually from your diet. It's actually developed from the body's reaction to its perception of its autonomic tone. In other words, how stressed or how calm it perceives the nervous system to be.
Hmm.
So that being said, the ability to firstly produce cholesterol, right, based on any type of immune compromise is actually a sign of health. So when I see high cholesterol, right, I'm actually happier than when I see low cholesterol.
I
Much
was
happier.
when you told me this, when we had, I think, the very first call, you were the first person who told me, I'm so happy to see your cholesterol levels high because it would be much harder to deal with anything to do with your thyroid if the cholesterol levels were too low.
Absolutely right. And also,
I was so
and
happy
it's
after.
way better, so much easier. So those, reasons for low cholesterol, familial tendency or genetics can also have an impact. I'm one of them. I've got very low cholesterol. I have to supplement with cholesterol through
Mhm.
new beginnings, sonic cholesterol. And there are other reasons, hyperthyroidism, which can be the outcome of one, poor exercise, which is not us, two, poor rates of sulfation going on in the liver. Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing could be manganese deficiency. The other one could be chronic gastrointestinal infections. Other one could be hemochromatosis, can actually incite lower cholesterol. Okay. In my situation, it was genetic. My mother has it, my grandmother has it, so on and so forth. It's far more difficult because low cholesterol, what it shows is that the immune system is exhausted and the body cannot actually surmount the requirement needed to create defense about what's going on in the immunological reactivity. So it actually shows a sign of immunological exhaustion. Okay.
Mhm.
Interestingly, low cholesterol is also associated with depleted quantities of serotonin in the cerebral spinal fluid. Most autistics actually have low cholesterol. Low cholesterol is also associated with Alzheimer's disease increasing by 68% likelihood. Low cholesterol is also associated with a 200% increase in mortality rates in those over the age of 60. Low cholesterol is also associated with an increase of lymphoma or leukemia-based cancers. Violent behavior, and one very close to heart because I had been an addict in my past, and I work so hard now to help others to overcome the enslavement of drugs. Low cholesterol also has been associated with greater rates of drug addiction,
That's crazy.
massive rates of drug addiction. So what instigates the outcome of low cholesterol? Well, these deficiencies and everything else, but often, poor thyroid activity has a direct effect onto the liver's capacity to synthesize and produce cholesterol. Why? If you think about the thyroid, the shape of a heart, if you look at the thyroid, it
Mhm.
almost looks like the shape of a heart. And it really is the heart of metabolism. Okay, metabolism regulates immunological processes and neurological processes. And when the thyroid isn't working correctly, your ability to be able to produce cholesterol will either initially become reactive and producing too much, or in worst case scenario, initially produce a lot and then deplete its capacity to surmount the defense at all, or not even be able to surmount defense in the first place, which is far more detrimental. It's easier to look into people to contend with any likelihood of metabolic disease, atherosclerosis, so on, than to look into leukemia. Okay? To treat
Mhm.
leukemia is far more difficult than that atherosclerosis, I can guarantee you. Right, and this is where we need to look at, what the impacts that cholesterol have. So in my article, I go a little bit more into detail about what cholesterol does, the impacts it can have on neurological disorders, addictions, bipolar, so on. Bipolar disease also very closely linked to low cholesterol
Low
levels.
cholesterol.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. Thyroid hormone plays a huge role, and this is where things become so elusive, Mary, because I've got a patient, and her bloods. Okay, because the Dutch test doesn't test thyroid markers, it tests cortisol markers in terms of metabolic perspective and sex hormone markers. But you can take a lot of correlation through sex hormones with thyroid health, particularly progesterone metabolites. Okay, so you can
Mhm.
also draw association there. However, currently we're using bloods, right, to determine thyroid activity. Now, her bloods, any doctor would say she should not go on thyroid medication. However, she's got the symptoms of hypothyroidism, poor activity of thyroid cellular uptake. Her red blood cells are showing the indication of thyroid compromised uptake. Her blood proteins are showing compromise to thyroid uptake as well. Her cholesterol levels directly associated there with poor thyroid. So LDL goes up when thyroid hormone does not have cellular sensitivity for uptake. Why? Because there are two major systems that control metabolism. Okay, the HPA and the HPT, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, in the back just below the kidneys, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid. Now, when one of these systems doesn't work adequately, the other one takes over. Cortisol is extremely oxidative, okay, causes a lot of oxidative damage. It's also modulatory to cytokines, but when the body, cortisol itself isn't actually the cause of oxidative damage, it's the poor sensitivity to its uptake and the accumulation of the hormone in the bloodstream that causes oxidative stress. But cortisol in itself, if it's sensitized and the receptors can take it up, actually modulates cytokines, so that cytokines can't cause inflammation in the body. So if it is used correctly, and how it's used correctly, if it's well balanced with thyroid cellular uptake, then if it's used correctly, it can actually modulate and prevent the likelihood of autoimmune diseases, which are often the outcome of poor regulation of cytokines and chemokines and leukotrienes in particular. Okay, so this is where, if your thyroid hormone isn't able to take up in a cellular mechanism, your cortisol load is going to go up, and the sensitivity to it is going to drop, and this is going to cause oxidative damage and microabrasions on the arterial tract or tracts, which is going to cause the body to be reactive in sending a particular protein carrier, a low density lipoprotein carrier of cholesterol, to heal those microabrasions. So when I see extremely high cholesterol, LDL, one of the first things I ask myself is, what is going on with the cellular thyroid hormone uptake? And then I look into reverse T3, free T3 ratios, free T4, free T3 ratios, and I'm able to determine, based on all of this, the actual position of what is going on with cellular thyroid hormone resistance. So you can have
which you did with my case, yeah.
Exactly. And yes, there are nutrient precursors one can take, or peptides one can take, to support it. Like thyrogen is a short-chain peptide for the thyroid, works really well. You can take selenium, you can take vitamin E, you can take iodine, all these things which are all the raw materials to support the activity. However, it's not necessarily always the density of the production, but rather the sensitivity of the uptake. And if there is a resistance to sensitivity of uptake, sometimes you need to create a forced situation. So in certain instances, under the help and direction of one of the world's best, in my opinion, at least, integrative doctors, Dr. Ahmed Hafaji, we monitor specific cases of inducing extremely high thyroid plasma serum level concentration for the purpose of rectifying this poor sensitized effect and modulating the cortisol effect. And actually, in fact, what we do by this is sensitize the glucocorticoid receptors for a short period and then slowly drop the dose because those receptors are more sensitized, which means that feedback mechanism between the two axes of nervous system reactions, the thyroid and adrenals, has a better chance to auto-regulate itself back into contention. Obviously, when you do this, you'll be very careful not to incite hyperthyroidism because the outcome of that can also be goiters and everything else. But you manage this based not only on the direct thyroid markers, but the correlative effect that thyroid markers have on other physiological systems. And this is the problem with modern day medicine. And I'm going to make it a big statement here, is that they categorize systems. The body does not work in a position of isolation. It works in a position of correlation. Okay, and integration, more importantly, integration. Nothing works in isolation in the body. Nothing.
Exactly.
Developing fecal matter is not if you don't develop enough fecal matter, you're going to have problems with your red blood cells, which are going to have problems with your bile activity. For example, if you're constipated, I can guarantee your red blood cells are not healthy.
And hormones as well, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
and if your stool is floating in the toilet bowl, I can guarantee you, forget about what's going on with hydration in large intestine, which it could be affected by. Your GABA receptors in your brain are not adequately working. They are not adequately modulated, which has a direct impact. Gamma-aminobutyric activity has a direct impact onto the sensitization of dopamine tracks. Now, if this doesn't happen for long enough, guess what can develop later in your life? Parkinson's disease.
Oh.
So, when these small little things that people don't take into account, constipation, diarrhea, so on and so forth, if they're left unchecked for a long period of time, they can incite serious pathologies.
Mm-hmm.
Pathologies which you would have to fight very hard to come back from. Not to say you can't, but it's an extreme amount of work. Leukemia is an extreme amount of work to navigate. Okay, Parkinson's disease, extreme amount of work. Okay, and it doesn't have to get there. But remember, these diseases don't just miraculously appear, right? You're not cursed. There's not some, some like we say in South Africa, sangoma or witch doctor in the rest of the world that says, oh, you're going to have Alzheimer's. There you go. That's not what happens, okay? Like, let's just be honest here. I do believe in spirituality. I do believe that there is, a contention between the light and the dark for sure. But often health and the state of poor health manifests itself over time because of a combination of factors. Okay, so, and this is where, and the topic we're talking about today, how cholesterol is so vitally important to ascertain what it is able to do for the body, because cholesterol is so very important. It heals the body. It provides the body with raw material to perform. It's important for the membrane structures so that, communication of ionic gradients can be maintained in a position to not cause disruption of electron loss, which causes oxidative damage, massive oxidative, which in other words creates rapid aging. And aging is the biggest and the most important disease to understand. Aging is a disease completely.
I have a
And we need to
question about
understand
that.
that. Yes, please.
So me having high cholesterol basically all my life, when I was like 13, 14, 15, I don't remember, the doctors wanted to put me on statins. My mom knew better and she was like, no way, like she's a child, like you're not going to put her on statins. We went to I remember pharmacy, we got like some red rice yeast supplements and whatnot. But I've had gray hair since I was in my early 20s. And I always, I tried like different things. I was doing what the biohackers were doing, trying to like reverse that. And I think that I did myself more harm than good by overdosing on certain supplements. Because these things don't work the same way they do for men and as they do for women. But could like early gray hair be a sign of something? I'm obsessed with this topic, by the way. And now, listening to you, that it's like early signs of aging. It's like, yes, I don't have wrinkles and people tell me that I don't look 38, but you look at my hair and it's like, it's gray.
So to give you an answer to, I'm going to give you a scenario of my family. So my grandfather was white at the age of 40. I have very low cholesterol. And my biological father has bipolar disorder. Okay, all linking back to indications of oxidative damage because of poor immunological reactivity. It's a genetic thing. What does this do? It alters the rate of methylation. Methylation can encourage the activity of AMPK, but it can also encourage the activity of mTOR. Methylation can help with the production of glutathione, but it can also help with the production of ATP. Okay, so it balances, depending upon your rate of methylation, you can either accelerate energy production or you can accelerate antioxidant recuperation from the energy production. So, in terms of the statins and cholesterol, I don't think statins are all bad. I think they have their place, in all honesty. I think that they're overused. They use effects, of course.
If you have a child who's like, not even 15 and you want to put them on statins without considering any other option.
Erroneous, completely erroneous. You should definitely, if you see high cholesterol, you need to look into, especially for a female going through the adolescence period, go look into the progesterone cycling, because progesterone has a huge part to play in the thyroid health, right? And the thyroid plays a huge role because of the impact that it has on glucocorticoid receptor sensitivity on the impact of cholesterol, right? So if you see high cholesterol, ask yourself, what are the metabolic amine-based hormones not doing effectively to regulate the immune system? It's as simple as that. And that's not to say, like certain patients that I recommend to go on a fibrate, because their cellular resistance to thyroid hormone is so dysregulated, that even when we get them into certain amounts where they're feeling better in other ways, there's still certain dysfunctions in the mitochondria, particularly in the cytochrome C component within the third phase of oxidative phosphorylation, that isn't able to utilize fatty acids in the best regard. And then what you don't want is, if this is the case, and there's certain genes that will also make people more susceptible to this, what you don't want is excessive extracellular ketones, because excessive extracellular ketones are probably the most radical elements to induce the production of superoxides, okay, which can cause methylation rates to ramp up because of oxidative stress, creating loss of pigment in the hair. A sign of aging itself. So, if your hair is starting to go white and everything else, it is immunological for sure, right? But you have to ask yourself, what is causing the reactivity of the immune system to upregulate certain components of methylation to try to support maintaining life, protecting itself, because that's what's happening. Okay, rapid aging isn't just because the body wants to get old. Rapid aging is because the body's trying to fight hard in order to preserve life. And you got to ask yourself, why is the body fighting harder than it needs to? And this is where, like, for example, like high cholesterol, look into thyroid meds to regulate this. Look into progesterone supplements. Look into aids like ashwagandha that help to reduce hepatic lipid peroxidation. I can't remember I'm not a herbalist. My friends are. I've got loads of them. We can, selenium, another one. Manganese levels, another one. Vitamin E
Copper?
levels, yet another one. Copper in a certain degree, in certain regards, in certain scenarios, sure, as long as there isn't a high concentration of oxalates, because the problem with having copper as a supplement in a scenario of high oxalates is that the oxalates unbind copper from its protein carriers, and copper and iron are highly radical, extremely radical to oxidative damage, and they cause tissue damage when they are unpaired from their protein carriers. So this is where, if you have high oxalates, don't supplement with copper or iron. First fix up the high oxalates. And unfortunately, the biggest reason for high oxalates is twofold: excess fungus, so mycotoxins or candida, others included as well, but those are the two major ones, and excessive heavy metals. The two biggest contributing factors to high oxalates. And everyone's like, oh, but I'm going to exclude oxalates from my diet. And that's great. If you have oxalates, good thing to do, sure. But just remember that fungus produces its own oxalates. And so do your human cells, in an attempt to try and offset the damage that heavy metals may do, because they have a higher binding affinity to heavy metals, which is a fail-safe, not a bad thing. But it's going to continue to do so unless you address the heavy metals. And this is where oral interference that Dr. Dom, works so well to rectify is invaluable. So many more of our patients, I am making it a prerequisite for them to see him, at least see, make sure there aren't any severe cavitations or metal, and also running hair tissue mineral analysis, because what I'm finding is that you can rectify so many other scenarios, but if there is a big disruptor, oral interference, an endocrine disruptor, it can bring you back to those, and oxalates on their own, screw up the brains, excuse my language, but screw up the brain, screw up the thyroid, screw up the pancreas, they deposit in so many areas of the body, right?
Which is my case as well, again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing about, you can be very careful with chelation, very, very careful. You don't want to just throw someone in chelation, especially if the thyroid's not working properly. You don't want to do that. That's not a good idea. You want to get their hormones to be in a position to handle chelation and handle, removal of whatever it is needs to be removed. And then after that's been done, then you go into detox. But you don't detox straight off the bat.
Sorry, I got scared.
Cue the music. Mary, I've just seen the time here. I know that Instagram is going to cut us off unless we tie this up, and we might lose the video.
Yes.
So I think maybe we should just wrap this up for the audience, because otherwise we can't save it. And I really want to share this video for so many people that may find information
really good
useful.
point. How did we talk for an hour already? I have no idea. But oops, I lost you. I can't hear you now. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to post down when we post this up on the feed, there's going to be a link to your newsletter, which is going to be about cholesterol and behavior, how it affects behavior. So I want everybody to sign up for that. The last one on estrogen was amazing. So I hope that everybody gets to read that. And thank you so much again for your time and for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. It's like I always go back to our videos and make notes because there's just so many good nuggets. And I think it's like really important for people to hear these things. So thank you very much for what you're doing and for sharing everything.
You're most welcome. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and blessings to everybody out there. And if anybody is struggling, especially when it comes to not being able to always be your best, please don't be hard on yourself. Understand that you should really commend yourself on doing everything that you can in order to overcome these moments. And often, we are, I believe, all incarnated into a specific life in order to meet the challenges of that life and to grow spiritually from it. So don't be too hard on yourself. Give yourself a little bit of credit for everything that you're doing to try and be a better person. And if you're sometimes angry and sometimes don't live up to, the ideal, that's okay too. Doesn't have to be your permanent definition. It's just a temporary flux.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Justin.
You're very welcome. Take care, guys.
Thank
Blessings.
you.
Peace,
Talk
guys.
soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.